Good evening, everyone. We'd like to welcome you all to the Night with the Experts program. This is a monthly program conducted by a Nuclear Energy Information Service based in Chicago. And it's an opportunity for members of the public like you to interface and dialogue with some of the nation's experts on nuclear power, nuclear waste, and renewable energy and alternative energy issues. Tonight, I'm really pleased that we have a special guest, someone whom I've known for almost 4 decades now, a friend and a colleague, Dr. Arjun Makhijani of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research. Now, shortly before the program started, we did get a message that Arjun is finishing up with a meeting that he absolutely had to be at. So he may actually be joining us a little bit late, but we will get him on as soon as possible. In the meantime, I'll fill you in on some of our plans coming up and introduce you to a few people. So to begin with, as I said, this program is conducted the last Thursday of each month. Next month, which is December, we are taking a break because of the holidays. It's really hard to get people involved during that period of time. And we'll be picking things up back in January. I believe it's January 25th. We will be having a guest from the Pacific Northwest. Becca Economopoulos works with the Natural History Museum, and she will be doing a program on arts and activism, how the two go together, how they support one another. She's had a lot of experience in that area. And in the coming year, we'll continue to have high quality guests, people some of you have known, some of them new, which will be focusing on the various nuclear issues that we think are important. As we gather tonight, you all know, the COP28 meeting is beginning. And one of the programs we have specialized in over the years has been the issue of nuclear power and climate change. So I can assure you that in the coming year, we will probably have a few of our guests discussing that particular issue. We also welcome the opportunity for you to send us notes. You could either put them in chat when we open the chat, or send us an email. If you have particular issues that you'd like us to see covered, if you have particular experts who you think would serve very well in this kind of a format, please let us know, and we will make an effort to consider them and schedule them in 2024. So before we go a little further, I want to introduce my colleague and board member, Jan Boudart. Jan is pretty much the shepherd for this project, and she is going to fill you in just a little bit on the proceedings tonight, and then we will introduce our guest. So Jan, why don't you take it away?
I want to tell you about Arjun Makhijani. Through his website, he is president of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research, which is devoted to a safer, healthier environment and the democratization of science. Now, in spite of the fact that he got a PhD in the subject of fusion, nuclear fusion, which is a very esoteric subject, he's really interested in providing activists, policymakers, journalists, and the public with understandable and accurate scientific and technical information on energy and environmental issues. And it's his goal to deal with exposure standards that are devoted to protecting the most vulnerable. And you'll find if you are looking through his book, or maybe he will discuss it tonight, or we can ask him in the chat, to talk about whom he considers the most vulnerable. And he takes the whole concept of reference man and stands it on his head. So to him, as far as the public welfare is concerned, the reference should be to the fetus and to the pregnant person and to the small child, because those are the people who are really affected by radiation the most.
Jan, this is Dave. I'm going to cut in here for a minute.
Sure.
Arjun has joined us, so I'm going to suggest that you do an introduction and we'll get started.
Oh, that was intended as my introduction. As Dave Kraft has said, he's been a friend of ours for years and years, and actually a special friend. So if you want to say anything more about it, or Linda might want to say something to introduce her friend Arjun, that would be fine. Or I think we could just launch into Arjun's talk.
Let's just go into the talk.
Yeah. Arjun, hi.
Get on camera. Thank you. Sorry, there was another meeting going on right up against this meeting. So I had a little bit of logistical issues before signing on. But I really appreciate being here. I really appreciate always working with NEIS and Dave and your board. And Jan, thank you. And my dear friend Linda, I'm glad to see you again. Yeah, it was lovely to talk to you yesterday. I'm sorry I didn't call you back today. It's been crazy. So anyway, with that, am I allowed to share my screen? I am. Okay. All right. So let me see. All right. That part of the technology worked. I will go through some slides and then I'll talk about the last thing that Jan said in terms of where we are with, too many bullet points and too many words. I'll just say them instead of writing them down and try to read them. But tritium is one of the most understudied radionuclides and unappreciated as regard its risks. Mainly because I think a lot of the risks don't come from cancer to people who are already born, living, especially those of us who are adults, especially those of us who are males. They are understudied. The dangers that I'm going to talk about are essentially totally unregulated. Tritium dumping and discharges are egregiously common. We recently failed to stop the Japanese from dumping tritium into the Pacific Ocean, and part of the rationale was everybody's doing it. So I'll just go through some stuff, and I hope we can have a long discussion and have plenty of time for it. So what is tritium? Tritium is hydrogen, basically, chemically. So these numbers, 1, 2, 3, represent the number of nucleons, protons, and neutrons. And the mass really is decided by the sum. It's not exactly equal to the sum, but it's called 1, 2, 3 in round numbers. It's very close to that sum. And so ordinary hydrogen, ubiquitous, part of water, as you know, part of us. Adult males, I think 60% water. Fetal water content is very high, much higher, 80%. Don't quote me on that, but I think, or higher, depending on the stage. So there's naturally occurring isotope of hydrogen. Isotope is same number of protons, different neutrons. Deuterium, it's found in seawater. And as a small constituent of seawater, but naturally occurring and not radioactive. And there's one radioactive isotope of hydrogen, what we're going to talk about today, tritium. It's radioactive. So I'll tell you more about it. All right. So when combined with oxygen, it should say, so I'll correct that, sorry. When combined with oxygen, when combined, read oxygen, not hydrogen. Tritium becomes radioactive water. H2O can become HTO or T2O, both hydrogens replaced or one. There is naturally occurring tritium in the atmosphere. It's created by the action of cosmic rays with the constituents and with nitrogen. Uh, and it's a 100 to 200 grams, about a third of a pound per year is created. About 10 times that much is a steady state amount, 12 times that much is a steady state amount. So a few pounds exist naturally. Created during nuclear bomb explosion. I'll show you some numbers as to the difference. Tritium has only beta radiation, so it decays into helium by emitting an electron. And those electrons are relatively low energy in the nuclear radiation sphere, 0 to 18.6 kilo electron volts, and the average is 5.7, if I'm remembering correctly. There's no gamma radiation. Tritium is very radioactive, nearly 10,000 curies per gram, half-life 12.3 years. Go through some facts. These facts are very important. So tritium beta rays do not penetrate the body if tritium decays outside the body. So if the radiation is outside your body, the dead layer of your skin, and for the most part, your clothes, will stop all the beta particles and nothing will go inside your body. Tritium is only dangerous inside the body, but not so much as a gas. So when you breathe it in, it takes some time for tritium to oxidize. So one breath is a very, very short time. And so basically you breathe in the tritium, you breathe it out, and the radiation dose is extremely tiny. But that changes completely if tritium is in the form of water vapor in the atmosphere or in your drinking water. And then it becomes part of your body because we're mostly water and water is transported throughout the body. It becomes part of every cell in your body. And then, of course, if it becomes part of plants, it's the same thing. Plants need water. They're mostly water. And they become incorporated. We're hydrocarbons, basically, with some 28 or 30 trace elements in us. So carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen is what mostly we are. Then there's some nitrogen and some 26 or 27 other elements and trace quantities. So when you take up water, it becomes part of us as organically bound hydrogen. And then when that hydrogen is radioactive, it becomes organically bound tritium. Just give you a little anecdote that during the Manhattan Project and after, when workers had exposure to tritium or tritiated water, they'd be given instructions to drink more water, drink more coffee. Here's a 6-pack of beer. And basically, you know, you urinate more when you have more liquid intake, and it passes through your body faster. So that's sort of being the overall approach to tritium. Dose is very low. Cancer risk will be low because it doesn't really stay in the body very long. And but that's the perspective of mostly an adult male worker, without thinking about the sperm of the worker. The tritium is very radioactive. So there's a drinking water standard, 20,000 picocuries per liter. I think it's too high. I'll come to that at the end. But 1 teaspoon of pure HTO, tritiated water, would contaminate over 600 million gallons of water to the drinking water limit. And it would contaminate about 50 times that much if I had my drinking water limit. So tritium is made for weapons in these 2 ways. Mostly it's made in reactors now at Watts Bar in Tennessee. You put a lithium-6 rod here, there are lithium-6 rods in the Watts Bar reactor, and neutron from the reactor chain reaction, some of them hit the lithium and it splits tritium, helium. So then the tritium is separated at Savannah River site. Savannah River site has tritiated water contamination in the river from the site all the way to the sea, which is about 100 and odd miles down, in very, very measurable concentrations. of tritium. Um, in the past decade or so, I haven't looked at the most recent data, but about 1,000 picocuries per liter, which is 5% of the standard, but 2.5 times the standard that I would advocate. And the best is not to have any pollution, but if you're going to have uh, public exposure, we should set standards differently because we're not paying attention to many of the risks. So here's what we've done through nuclear weapons testing. This is atmospheric testing. So northern hemisphere concentrations of tritium in tritium units. You don't need to worry about, look at the relative amount. So with the testing, and especially the huge hydrogen bombs, uh, there was a lot of tritium in the atmosphere. Then it stayed there in measurable amounts. It got mixed up, and these are averages. And then it decayed. You can see, so from 63, it gets so the decline in concentration is not just because of decay, because it's water, it falls on the land, goes into the river, ultimately mostly into the ocean, it evaporates, become very diluted. So this decline in concentration is largely dilution and mixing, and then also decay. After 4 half-lives, you have just a few percent left. I can give you that number during question sessions, during Q&A, because I can quickly calculate it, but I don't want to stop now. So you can see in 1945, pre-Trinity, the concentration in precipitation was 0.1 to 0.6 becquerels per liter. Around numbers about 30 picocuries per becquerel, 27 to be exact. And now it is still 10 to almost 40, 10, yeah, 10 to 40 times the minimum of 1945, somewhat less from the 0.6. So the effect of atmospheric testing is still high. This is in precipitation. In the oceans, the average is now about 0.1 becquerel per liter. It was much less than that before, of course. So all reactors emit tritiated water to the air as part of water vapor. So we have radioactive rain and snow around every nuclear power plant in differing amounts. These are emissions from pressurized water reactors. They have more tritium made in them. Tritium is produced in reactors through tertiary, when an uranium atom splits into 3 pieces, and then it's also made from neutron irradiation of boron, which is added to the cooling water and nuclear reactions with boron. So pressurized water reactors have boron in their cooling water, so you have more tritium in pressurized water reactors. But you also have it so you can see these are average emissions. The orange bar is the median value, 50% had more, 50% had less. And the blue is the 75% value, curies per year. Curie is a lot of radioactivity. That's why standards are in picocuries, which is 1/1,000,000th of a curie. Okay, here, so it's not there's a lot of variation among power plants. The NRC has done, to my knowledge, nothing significant to say, some power plants are emitting very little. Why don't you shape up? So you can see many reactors are just 0 to 10. It does depend on whether it's boiling water or pressurized water reactor. And now a lot of tritium emissions come from spent fuel pools. And so some reactors have one reactor had more than 1,000 curies per year. Two had 300 to 1,000. And you can see there's a huge variation. And this should be the subject of better regulation. So here's how tritium gets into us. This is diagrams from slightly distorted, I'm sorry. I tried to expand them. And it's still kind of fuzzy. The original, copy is there in my book. It's much clearer. So, basically it'll fall down as rain, it gets into the soil, it gets into plants, it gets incorporated as organically bound tritium. Plants put it back in the air through evapotranspiration. There's direct evaporation from the soil. There's root absorption. Then it falls back down and there's deposition. And it'll run off into, get into the groundwater and get into the rivers and the oceans. Cattle eat the grass, they eat the grain, then it winds up in milk, and you and me and all the other creatures that need water and food. So it's basically become part of the hydrocarbon system that we are, the ecological system that we are. All right, so we need to, a large part of my story is about cells. So cells are mostly water. These are the 14 parts of a cell. And number 1 and 2 is inside, is that basically the nucleus and the core of the nucleus. And that's when we say DNA and the double helix and all that, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the chemical that reproduces the cell, which is DNA, and all the base pairs and the chromosomes and so on. Now, DNA, of course, there's natural radiation and other natural insults. Actually, just eating produces oxidation in the body because that's how we digest the food and gives us energy. So there's normal oxidative damage in cells. The DNA knows pretty well how to repair itself for most kinds of damage, not all kinds of damage. That's why there are natural diseases and cancer. Naturally, cancer also occurs due to natural radiation, I believe. But the nucleus has powerful capabilities to repair itself. What we call, but there's also remnants of bacteria, which are called mitochondria. And I think it was Lynn Margulis, the great ecologist, biologist, who elaborated this idea that, bacteria got incorporated. If I'm not mistaken, it was her. And a very great scientist, and up there with the best. And she hypothesized that evolution happens through endosymbiosis, by us incorporating creatures and then they becoming part of us because it's beneficial to us. And exhibit A is bacteria becoming part of um, eukaryotes, creatures that have nuclei, like that 1 and 2 circled there. And so these are not actual bacteria, they're just remnants of bacteria. They have their DNA, but it's very different. It's a much more limited DNA, much, much smaller. But there are hundreds of or thousands of mitochondria in every single cell. There's only one nucleus. So we call this empty DNA, not empty as in nothing in it, but the letter M and the letter T for mitochondria. This number 9 here in the list, mitochondrion is a singular. And on the right, you see that it has a very different DNA. It's a circular DNA. This DNA is very susceptible to damage. And because it's just the remnant of a bacterium, it has far fewer repair capabilities. And so when it is damaged, you're damaging the energy system of the body. That's what makes your heart beat. That's what makes you walk and move from one place to another, tap your feet, play music, speak, breathe. None of it can happen without the mitochondria converting food into the basic energy chemical of the body called ATP. And so what I worried about in my book, mainly in terms of damage, is what happens when, do I admit this person? Okay. I admitted somebody, I don't know who I admitted, showed up on my screen. So since the mitochondria are the energy system and and they are essential to our living and breathing and all creatures. So one of the most remarkable things about evolution is that this energy system is basically the same in all creatures that have nuclei. There might be one exception or so, I don't remember right now, but it is the same. So, plants have it exactly the same. It's the same system. Um, Tigers have it, jellyfish have it, fish have it. Shall, o- except, bacteria, of course, have a different system, but these are remnants of bacteria. So if we are damaging the mitochondrial system, you're basically damaging the ability to breathe and for your heart to beat and your immune system and so on. And tritiated water enters every cell. Of course, you have to have enough in your body, but as I say, tritium is very radioactive and only a small amount is necessary. When you take it in as water, the cell wall cannot distinguish between non-radioactive and radioactive water. What happened? My slides are not moving. Ah, okay. So I'm going to get a little technical on you. So what has happened in studying radiation is, it all started that before before the Manhattan Project, there were radium dial painters and medical doctors and other medical personnel who got sick from X-rays, etc. But the intensive study and the discipline of what came to be called health physics, because mostly it was created by physicists, and so they looked at the body as physics system in in which radiation was being deposited. And what they did was basically look at the body as a bag of water. And and I don't know that I have too many pictures. Let me just stop this and talk so you're not looking at a screen, but you can pay more attention to the words. So basically what they did is they said the body is basically water. And we all would agree with that. That's a very well established fact. And so we treat the body like a bag of water. We can calculate how much energy will be deposited in it and how many ionizations it will create. So for example, a single beta particle, an average energy 5.7 kilovolts, 5,700 electron volts. The ionization energy of water is 12 electron volts. So you can do the division. You create several hundred ionizations of water for each beta particle decay that happens in a cell. Maximum energy, you create over 1,000 ionizations. So that much ionization, when water is ionized, it creates reactive oxygen species, and non-radioactive chemicals also damage, like heavy metals also damage the cell in the same way, some organic chemicals as well. And so what happens is basically it attacks other chemicals in the cell, including the chemicals in the mitochondrial DNA. I haven't studied damage to other parts of the cell. I focused on mitochondrial DNA because it is DNA and it's part of the reproductive system. Um, I don't know whether mitochondrial DNA has been more neglected because it's entirely an inheritance from our mothers. Sperm does have mitochondria, but the mitochondrial DNA in sperm is stripped in the process of fertilization. So what remains in the developing fetus is only the maternal mitochondrial inheritance. All of us have mitochondrial inheritance only from our mothers. So when that is damaged in a woman, um, that inheritance gets passed on. And this is a topic that has been pretty much entirely ignored in radiation protection. I leave it to the sociologists and anthropologists among you to figure out why that has happened, but it has happened, and that is not a trivial question. The the other thing is, so you're treating the body like a bag of water. That is more or less saying the earth is flat. Now the earth is flat in the near. So as a first approximation, if you're looking out over your backyard, you know, it's a little bit undulated, but as a first approximation, not bad. But in the bigger picture, very wrong. So, and they did recognize that it was very wrong. So how radiation affects the body is how dense is so it's not just how much radiation is deposited in the body, is where it's deposited, and how dense is it, because the damage happens at the cellular level and at the DNA. So if you have a lot of energy dumped in a single cell, you could kill it, or you could damage it, and you could damage the DNA. And if the deposition is a lot per particle, then the damage in the cell will be greater. If the same damage is distributed over 100 cells, then each cell will have less damage and more chance to be repaired. So this fact kind of stood out pretty early in radiation studies, that alpha radiation, because it consists of big particles, helium, nuclei, will basically deposit all the energy in a very short track. It's called high linear energy transfer radiation, high LET radiation. And so it'll create a lot more damage for the same amount of energy deposition. So bag of water model says the total quantity of energy deposited is important. Relative biological effectiveness says how dense that energy deposition is in a cell is very important and matters a lot. Since the focus has been on cancer, which I don't disagree, the focus should be on cancer, is a very important adverse health impact of radiation and well established. And so there should be a lot of emphasis on cancer. But that's not the only outcome. And we have neglected the other outcomes. And so with the focus on cancer, what happened was, and so will somebody give me like a 5 or 10 minute, Dave or Jan, will you give me a 5 or 10 minute?
Sure. So you've taken probably about 25 minutes now. And so how about it if you go on to 35 minutes?
Okay, great.
10 minutes enough? Okay,
yeah,
thank
10
you.
minutes would be pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically they said, well, so each organ actually, whether it's your liver or stomach or heart or brain, so on, will have a different kinds of cells, and so different relative biological effectiveness. But for regulatory purposes, that's too hard. And so a factor, initially they thought, oh, cancer impact 10 times of gamma radiation, because gamma radiation tends to pass through a lot of cells and depositing its energy. Some of it, when it's very high energy gamma radiation, some of it even comes out the other side of the body, like some very high energy bullets. And so it has a low energy density of deposition. And so relative to that, alpha particles would be 10 times the damage. So energy deposition is rads. And when you multiply it by 10 for alpha particles, it becomes REM. When you multiply rads by 1 for gamma radiation, it becomes REM, but it's the same number. But REMs denotes harm, the risk of harm. But it's only, and then they later changed the number to 20 because they realized. So you can imagine it's not like measuring energy deposition in the body, which is a much harder physics number, because we can calculate that, especially if you're thinking of body as a bag of water. It's easy to calculate. Now you're dealing with a judgment about harm to health, what is called endpoints. So here the endpoint is cancer. And for cancer, the RBE is 20. But we've entirely forgotten that we were once all in our mother's wombs. Who's the youngest person is there a very young person in this group? Tell me your name. Is that Marion?
Yeah, Marion.
I protest.
Would you be willing to tell me your age?
Oh, I'm 59.
Okay, good. Thank you. So that is only partly correct. You are 59, but
Plus,
a part of you is as old as your mother, because the ovum from which we were made was made when your mother and my mother was in her mother's womb, because they're all formed when a girl's fetus is developing and the ova develop at a particular time in the ovaries. So part of us, all of us, is as old, a little bit older than what our mothers told us their age were, because the ova was formed a little bit before they were born, a few months. So now we can all claim that we're pretty old, even when we're only 20 or 30.
so wait. My mother was 18 years old when she conceived me.
Oh, so 59 plus 18, 18 and a half. Thank you. So that this inconvenient fact has been ignored. So in my book, I'll show you the picture. It's easy, available for download. Politics and Prose printed it. If you want a hard copy, you can go to politicsandprose.com and order a copy. But download it, it's free and searchable. Big advantage, but it's nice to have a paper copy if you want. The I lost my thread being a salesperson. I got distracted. What was I saying? Yes. So
We're older than our age.
yeah, so I wanted to focus on two things, basically the energy system of the body, which I've already talked about, and endpoints. So it turns out that tritium deposits essentially all of its energy in a single cell. So in that respect, it's very much like an alpha particle. It has much less energy than alpha particles. Alpha particles are like 5 million electron volts, and tritium is like 5,000 electron volts, rough numbers. But all the energy gets deposited mostly in the water and ionizes the water. When you ionize water, you create hydroxyl radicals, just OH, H2O without one of the H's. Hydroxyl radicals are extremely reactive chemically, and they create this oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is normal. There's a balance between oxidation and reduction. That's what makes the heart beat and you and me move and eyes to blink and to be able to listen and talk and so on. But excess oxidative stress is very bad and creates lots and lots of problems. And that's what happens when you have radioactivity or certain other pollutants in cells. You create excess so the oxidative stress is not able to be managed by a reducing counterpart. That's why.
Arjun, I apologize. 5 minutes has passed.
Okay, thank you.
From the 10 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, I'm almost done. So when you create oxidative stress in us, there are all these repair mechanisms that are perfect, and in mitochondria, they're less. But the characteristic of a developing baby inside the womb is that the cell division is very fast and the repair mechanisms are not available, especially early on. So there are many stages in pregnancy, of course, as you know. There's the blastocyst, initially the fertilization, it hasn't attached yet. Then there's attachment, there's the development of the placenta, the organs develop, in the first weeks. Mostly in the first 8-10 weeks, they start to develop. The brain actually goes on developing the neurological system for 20 plus weeks. The brain goes on developing after we are born. I did talk to a doctor who specializes in these things, and she said, a lot of your brain, the number of your brain cells literally physically grows. So what are the consequences that we know about? And we can, I'll be brief here. There were pregnant women in Hiroshima and Nagasaki who did not die and whose babies did not die at the time of the bombings. A lot of them, of course, did die, but these children were born, and after the study started in 1950, 5 years after the bombings, these children became part of the studies, and there were many things that were examined, but one thing that stood out was severe neurological damage among these children. Measurable to the point that they were not able to feed themselves or take care of themselves. So that kind of severe, it was called severe mental retardation in the ICRP study. We might use different words today, but that's the technical term that was used then. But children were not able to be fully functional and look after themselves and their needs as they grew up, as most children can. And the startling conclusion, this is like we're talking the 1980s now, the startling conclusion was the same as the conclusion for cancer, is that a small amount of radiation during the early time of pregnancy will produce a small risk of severe neurological damage. That's what I'm going to call this. And the references are there in my book. A larger amount of radiation exposure of the fetus will produce a proportionally, so it's very much like the solid cancer, linear no threshold, more dose. So now if we come back to tritium, where discharge is the most commonly discharged radionuclide from power plants, the Japanese government and power company TEPCO are dumping it in the oceans. The French have dumped hundreds of times more every year for decades from their plutonium separation plant into the English Channel. The British did the same in the Irish Sea until their reprocessing plants were shut, I think last year or two ago. And they've polluted the oceans all the way to the Arctic. The neighboring government said stop, and the French and British did not, and the French are still going on. And the Japanese may soon start their own reprocessing plant. And I've wondered whether that was the rationale, kind of, let's do this from Fukushima now, and then we can dump 200 times more from Rokasho, which is a plutonium separation plant that's not yet been opened up the coast from Fukushima. Now, think that tritium crosses the placenta with the food and water. It invades every cell. It can create failure to implant, early failed pregnancies. It can create malformations, what's called teratogenic damage. So basically malformations. This matter has been so little studied. And I'll close with this anecdote and we can talk about it. I'll tell you what I think the tritium standard should be, and other standards, and I'll give you the references for that during the discussion if you like. I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. It's been quite a day, and I did lose my train of thought. What was I saying? Can somebody remind me?
You were saying that it's very, very much understudied. The study of.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Jen. So in 1999, Lisa Ledwidge, our then outreach director, and I wrote a letter, and we circulated it for signature and got signatures from more than 100 scientists and physicians and community leaders, and sent it to the national academies that was studying the impact of low-level radiation, and said, please pay attention to pregnancy issues, radionuclides that cross the placenta. You know, these are neglected issues. We're not there's so much hullabaloo about life beginning at conception. And in some ways, some life does begin at conception. It's a fertilized cell that develops into a baby if it comes to term. But we haven't paid any attention to the rights of women who want to have babies, to their rights to a clean environment. 20, we don't know exactly how many, but northwards of 20% of pregnancies result in failure early on. Mostly the women don't even know that they're pregnant. because they think they're having a period. And we don't know the exact number because it's very hard to study because of that very reason. And environmental insults are part of that. It's part of nature's way, actually, the natural environmental insults, so far we're concerned, it's part of nature's way of taking care of that. So we said, please study this. The Beer 7 report of 2006 actually had an appendix devoted to that letter. And it said, it addressed some of the things, to their credit, that we said you should. But this particular thing, they said, we'll study that at another time. In 2022 January, I sent another letter to another National Academies committee saying, in 2006, you told us we'll study this. And we've still got all these outstanding questions. I call their attention to this 1980s study saying, okay, severe neurological damage to children. Now it's the child and their whole families and all the social and medical resources that have to be devoted to that. It's tremendous misery and difficulty for everybody. And yet in 2022, I did not have a satisfactory answer from the National Academies about when this is going to happen and whether it is going to happen. So whereas drinking water standards are concerned, when we got onto this reference man question that Jan introduced me talking about, that was, also 15, 20 years ago, we wrote about it. We said, okay, yeah, men are happy to be protected, but we're automatically protected if other people are protected. Sometimes men are more at risk because they're more at risk for some cancers, or male children. But generally, female children are most at risk for most cancers, much more at risk. And females are generally more at risk than males. And so for pregnancy, we regulate the radioactive workplace like in a nuclear power plant. If a woman declares her pregnancy, her dose is limited. I'm done. Her dose is limited to 500 millirem, which is 5 times the dose limitation for you and me. In Europe, the dose limitation was lowered to 100 millirem when the dose for you and me was lowered. No other pregnancy is protected. There's no move to say, okay, if you're dumping radioactive water downstream from Watts Bar or Braidwood, I do think the numbers down in the neighborhood of Braidwood, where there are a lot of brain cancers and neurological cancers collected by the father of a girl that did get cancer, brain cancer, are quite persuasive about the neurological damage near nuclear power plants. And I suspect if it comes from the power plant, because there are also refineries and so on, it's probably tritium. So I'll close by saying that these water standards were not developed for this kind of consideration. We don't know what the standard should be, but certainly 400 picocuries per liter, which is 50 times stricter, is a persuasive standard. The Department of Energy itself proposed 500 downstream of Rocky Flats when they were cleaning up Rocky Flats. The state of California has a guideline of 400. Similar, so I'm not kind of, Arjun Makhijani doesn't like nuclear power, so we're proposing something that, so no, this is something that has been considered. It's sort of that a license for a nuclear power plant shouldn't be a license to dump radioactive water into the air and water systems. Of course, not just nuclear power plants, but also the weapons system. So in the Savannah River, it's both the Vogel power plant, and now there are 2 more going online there, plus the nuclear weapons plant where they used to make tritium, and now where they refine the tritium from the Watts Bar reactor. So we have a lot of work to do. My book has become something of a resource. I got a letter from Argentina where they use CANDU reactors, which have a lot more tritium emissions than pressurized water reactors, saying they've been measuring radioactivity in the milk and food and so on. I haven't had time to give him a thoughtful, or her, I can't remember, a thoughtful response yet, but I will. I know that it's found its way into some parts of the EPA, for which I'm very grateful. And I hope that you will make good use of it. I do want to say that my dear friend Kay Dry funded the whole enterprise of doing a whole book on this very neglected radionuclide. I hope you find it useful. Thank you.
Arjun, that was really wonderful, and it's very gratifying to have people beginning to understand that you are working on the concept of exposure standards for the United States and for internationally, because that is it's the exposure standards that are so out of whack with reality. Okay, so we're going to have a Q&A now. Unless, Dave, do you want to say something, or anybody? I think we'll just head out to the Q&A unless anybody has an objection. And so the first person to raise hand was Stephen Sondheim. And so, Steve, go ahead and answer your question. I mean, don't answer it, ask it. Or maybe, whatever. Steve, you're on.
I just put it into chat because I was just able to. Hi, Arjun. I love your work, and it's so nice to know you.
Thank you.
I'm wondering about, and let me ask the whole thing, and then you can, is tritium necessary for nuclear power? And let me look at the second part. Is the major source, okay, what could be done to stop it is the second part, or to reduce it. And are the major sources evaporation from the water stored in the plant, and or obviously they're from releases? So in other words, where is it getting into our system? Is it even necessary? And what could be done? Well, that's a whole other talk, I know. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter. I can answer it. It's not a problem. So let's separate so some tritium is natural and you can't do anything about it. But it's a very small amount of the tritium. Most of the tritium today in the environment comes from nuclear power plants and from reprocessing plants, the plutonium separation plants, because it's in the spent fuel as a product of fission, and in nuclear reactors, it's in the water. In pressurized water reactors, it's in the cooling water because we have boron in the cooling water. And the same for spent fuel pools. There's boron in the spent fuel pools, and tritium develops as a result of boron and nuclear reactions in the spent fuel pool. And there's some spontaneous fission that goes on. So it builds up because it has a half-life of 12.3 years. So every now and then the primary water is filtered because it doesn't stay pure. You need pretty pure water to not gum up the nuclear reactor system and the steam generators and all that. And so every now and then the primary water, which has a fair amount of tritium in it, is dumped into the waterways. Now, that might be the oceans for coastal power plants. It might be rivers, it might be lakes. In some cases, cooling ponds. They build these massive cooling ponds to supply cooling water to reactors, because 2/3 of the heat generated in the reactor is rejected to cooling water, and 1/3 it becomes electricity. That's sort of the price you pay for a steam cycle. And so tritium is a necessary byproduct. They don't deliberately create it because they like to be polluters. But if you're going to have nuclear power with fission, tritium will be generated to some extent because it's a byproduct of the nuclear reactions that take place. And different reactors will have more or less tritium, but some tertiary fission will take place, and there will be some tritium from essentially every reactor. So the other emissions come from the weapons business, and so the Manhattan Project weapons did not have tritium, but when you explode a nuclear weapon, there are a lot of neutrons that are created, and interaction of neutrons in the atmosphere will create tritium. And then, of course, today's weapons do have tritium in the primary to economize on plutonium. And then the thermonuclear bomb part of hydrogen bombs, that the hydrogen part of that bomb is basically tritium and deuterium. That's what the hydrogen bomb is. And the tritium is actually made in the course of the explosion in hydrogen bombs. And so not all of it is consumed. And that huge peak that you saw as a result of atmospheric testing, so all winds up in the atmosphere and it stays around until it diluted and decayed away. Diluted doesn't make it go away, it just, makes it less concentrated. And of course, it becomes part of ecosystems, because I've told you the energy system in you and me is common to plants and weeds and algae and fish and lobsters and crabs and shellfish and everything. All multicellular beings and all eukaryotes that are essentially all that are even single cellular. So that's where it comes from. So if you're going to have nuclear power, you're going to have some of this. Now, the dumping practices are permissive. I think the amount of tritium that's generated can be controlled. This needs to be studied as to what all the factors are. You could store the water and not dump it. At Fukushima, we advocated that because Fukushima water that's stored in those tanks has a lot of other radionuclides, plutonium, strontium, cesium, and so on, some in quite high concentrations. So filter that water, which is now proposed, and then make concrete with the water that has tritium in it. And what that does is the tritium does not, you don't want to be using radioactive water to do things, but concrete with little potential for human contact, like the concrete they're using on site or for the seawalls, the tritium beta particles will not penetrate. You could go and stand right up next to the concrete and it will not give you a measurable radiation dose. So there are things, instead of the tritium dumping that's going on, to do with it. You could hold it up in seismically safe tanks. You have to hold it up for 60, 70, 80, 90 years. It's a long time, but it's measurable. It's not like plutonium or carbon-14, which have very, very long half-lives. And I see Gordon's comment. Some of the tritium comes from the tertiary fission as a result of the fission. That's why it's there in boiling water reactors, because boiling water reactors do not have boron in the coolant. I don't remember the proportions, but you can look at the numbers. The boiling water reactors have a lot less because they don't have boron in the cooling water. So that's right, that it's largely from boron, but there's tertiary fission in the fission process. So basically, it's the same answer. If you can avoid having nuclear power plants, it avoids creating a lot of problems. But if you're going to have them, you should find ways to minimize the dumping in the environment, which is what we've been trying to do with trying to persuade Japan to not dump into the ocean, because then it becomes part of the ecosystems and damages everything, because tritium enters, it's water.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arjun. That was a great answer. And it looks like we've got a triumvirate here of stellar anti-nuclear activists, John LaForge, Marion, and Alfred. And I don't know which of the three of you, or if all three of you want to ask a question, but I'm just going to turn it over to the group.
Thank you, Jan. And thank you, Dave and Jan, for inviting Arjun to be part of the program tonight, or the program. You couldn't have a better guest. Arjun, I wanted to ask about accident that happened or was revealed recently at Monticello, Fukushima-style reactor in Minnesota on the Mississippi River. They admitted to having dumped or leaked 400,000 gallons of tritiated water into the groundwater on site, heading toward the Mississippi. They said it had 5 million picocuries per liter of tritium and some other items too. That's the first question. I'm wondering, I loved your equation there about a teaspoon of tritiated water being able to contaminate a massive volume. One thing the company said after admitting this $400,000 400,000 gallon leak was that they were going to pump it back out and put the tritium back to use. That was very interesting as a proposal. The other question that they raised, or that Marion raised, is, do you know if reverse osmosis filtration will remove tritium from the
No,
water?
it will not.
Okay.
There's
this,
nothing-
Is it possible to pump groundwater out of the ground to retrieve the tritium as the company claimed to have done?
Well, the Canadian reactors, and Gordon, go ahead and amplify my response if you want. But Canadian reactors have heavy water for cooling, which becomes, tritium more easily in the coolant due to bombardment with neutrons. And they have very, very high concentrations of tritium in the cooling water. And some of it is at least extracted and sold commercially for exit signs and things. And I don't believe they give it to the US for use in weapons, but they do produce it commercially. So when the concentration is high enough, not at the levels where it is dumped in the rivers and in the atmosphere from US nuclear power plants, which is, in the thousands of curies. Sometimes it does rain around nuclear power plants. It can rain in the millions of picocuries per liter. I mean, there was some snow or ice at a nuclear power plant in New Jersey that had millions of picocuries per liter in some ice inside the power plant, but which is evidence, that it rains radioactivity around nuclear power plants. We actually did commissioned some modeling of how much comes down routinely from the Braidwood power plant, just because it's of interest because of the cancers around and so on. Yeah, but you can't, beyond, when the concentration is too low, you can't separate it because it's chemically alike. You need, like the uranium enrichment process, you need to rely on the differences in atomic mass between the tritium and the hydrogen to separate it.
Thank you, Arjun. And I want to point out to people that it is nearly 5 after 8, and this program is scheduled to go to 8:30. So if we go beyond 8:30, that would be at Arjun's.
Okay.
He would be the one to decide if we go beyond 8:30. Therefore, when we get to 8:30, we're going to draw the program to a close unless Arjun is willing to continue. So our next questioner is Connie. Good to see you, Connie.
Same here, Jan. Arjun, thank you so much. Thank you for all your work for all these years. I wanted to clarify, did you say that 1 teaspoon of pure tritiated water could contaminate 600 million gallons of drinking water?
I did say that, yes.
But
it has to be pure. I mean, the
Yeah,
water that we're talking about is not, it's extremely dilute. Most of it is just plain water.
Got it. Would you say that tritium crosses the placental barrier more or less easily than, say, let's say other radionuclides? Is there a difference in crossing the placental barrier?
There is a difference, and I can answer your question very quantitatively.
Okay.
Here you go. You can see it. So these are the elements. This is intakes when the person's pregnant, has radioactivity in their body already prior to pregnancy, and this is intakes during pregnancy. So if the mother has 1 unit of radioactivity, the tritium concentration in the fetus will be 1.6. So the fetus actually has more tritium concentration than the mother. It's the same if it's organically bound tritium. Organic carbon also, because the baby is developing faster, it's absorbing everything that it can. You can see that radioactive phosphorus intakes during pregnancy 10 times more in the fetus then. But plutonium also crosses the placenta. So it's doesn't concentrate very much, except in the third trimester, if the intake is during pregnancy, where the ratio between the pregnant person and the fetus is 1. Americium, you can see the ratios for americium. So all the different radionuclides. This is a partial list. You can find a longer list in the source that's given over there. So this is known since decades, and we're doing nothing about it.
One other question, if I may. We just, I should say Terry Lodge, who's on this, who's in this meeting. He was the attorney. Just Tuesday, we filed contentions with the NRC on relicensing the license extension for the Perry Nuclear Power Plant in Ohio. And one of them dealt with tritium, and we relied heavily on you.
Okay.
One issue.
Excuse me, Connie, but you know, there's people waiting, and we have a rule which I didn't explain at the beginning, that a person, you have one question. If you have a follow-up question, we'll call on you later. Okay. So could we make it a little bit, there's people waiting that want to ask questions. So I've taken up more time than I want to explaining this. Could we go to the next person, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, it'll be Carrie, and then raise your hand again, Connie, if and if other people haven't, if everybody has spoken that wants to, I'll call on you again. Carrie, you asked your question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Sometimes I have trouble with the mic. There are different kinds of reactors, and the Canadian reactors are particularly bad for creating tritium, as far as I can determine. And besides that, there are also things you can do. There are things you can add to reactors to capture the tritium, so that it is not released into the water. I couldn't follow the details of what I found on the web. As far as I can tell, these new thorium reactors do not create tritium, but I'm not sure about that. Given the catastrophic climate change is another big issue, that if the temperature goes up by 20 degrees, it won't matter how much tritium there is. Maybe we need to think about just restricting what kind of reactors we build instead of just saying no reactors at all. Climate change is a big issue, and could be bigger than a little bit of tritium, which will kill some people. Climate change will kill all of us.
Yeah. So I didn't say that we shouldn't build any reactors because of tritium. My talk was confined to this neglected radionuclide and its dangers. That's all this talk is about. Whether I would agree with you that if it were all about tritium, that it would be more of an argument. My argument against new nuclear power plants is that it's too much money and too much time. And the nuclear industry, well, you can see from the cost. I mean, you don't have to believe me. We're already, in the United States, we're already over our carbon budget. And the first small modular reactors, if they ever come online, will be 10 years from now. And then you have to set up a mass manufacturing. It's delusional that we're going to have a significant contribution from, in my opinion. And people are going after it because the government's pouring money into it. And you know, maybe I am wrong.
That's not what I've seen for how fast. That's not what I've seen for how fast we can get to it if we wanted to. But
if we want, I think the willingness has been there. That's a different conversation. Yes, and there's plenty of arguments on both sides. A lot of very good people who are not invested in the nuclear industry think like you that we should have nuclear power. I'm organizing a panel at the American Physical Society meeting in April on this very question. So come and attend it. It's in Sacramento in April. And we will, there will be both sides of the argument there. The pro-nuclear is actually Dr. Chu, former Secretary of Energy, will be speaking there. And I was part of inviting him to speak on that topic because it's a legitimate debate. And I understand that it is. So I'm not saying that you're not raising a good point. I just happen to be on one side of that debate.
Okay, thank you, Arjun. And we'll ask now Philip Holt to ask his question, please. Can you hear? Oh, there you go.
Thank you. Yes, I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Arjun, for sharing your insights with us tonight. I really appreciate it. And I wanted to, correct me if I misunderstood, but I heard some information that was new to me, and I wanted to clarify that with you. Is it the case that damage to individual mitochondria within a cell can actually result in heritable damage or other kind of tetragenic effects?
Well, if it is, there are hundreds or thousands of mitochondria in a single cell, and I'm not a biologist to be able to tell you what. So if it is damaged DNA, it would be heritable. I do not know, how Mother Nature deals, because Mother Nature does have ways of minimizing risk to future generations. And so I have never come across any literature that says, what are the thresholds of heritability, if there are any. So this is a question that's outstanding in my own mind because I have not seen the answers to these kinds of questions. And as I've said, there are some effects for which thresholds are posited, but on close examination, as I argue in my book, if you look at the endpoints closely, those thresholds become very small as to be meaningless. So you can have damage at fairly low doses. But for the individual mitochondrial DNA damage and its heritability, it's above my pay grade for the moment. After I get the pay raise, I'll be able to tell you. No, I'm just kidding. There may be an answer out there for people who have researched it, but I haven't come across it. But I won't say that, I'm not a biologist and I haven't researched every single topic as deeply as it could be researched, obviously.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. It seemed kind of critical to your argument that, or what you were explaining was that mitochondrial DNA is separate from the nucleus, and therefore
It is.
would have, if it was disrupted, it might have a different heredity path. So
it is. It does. So that is all true. What I told you is all true. It's just a specific question you asked. If there's one mitochondrion in a cell, what is the probability of it creating, mitochondria come from the mother and we could inherit it, but I do not know if, for example, so many pregnancies result in failure from natural reasons. And those natural reasons include environmental factors. So if there's an ovum with mitochondria, would that have a lower chance of being fertilized, for example? Would it result in a failed pregnancy if it were fertilized? These are answers that I think are not yet researched. And that's part of the reason that we've been calling for research. So it's not that the mitochondrial DNA damage is not heritable. It is, but I don't know the answer to your specific question of what happens when there's one DNA damaged mitochondrion and its heritability impact.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Michelle, you go ahead and ask your question, please. And we're very happy to see you here.
Hey, so happy to be here. And by the way, just as an aside, I have to say Arjun was actually mentioned yesterday at the UN in some of the discussions of the PRW for anyway. But this is what I wanted to say. I was very excited when I read your book and found the word mitochondria because I've been facing down the same theory. What I wanted to ask you about, however, is also what your thoughts are on cellular signaling. because it really seems that there are many lines of cellular biology right now that aren't simply looking at just the inducement of the generation of free radicals, such as reactive oxygen species, nitrogen species, but are looking at this incredible interplay of communication that goes on between cells. And it strikes me that with respect to tritium specifically, because it dilutes in all the cells of the body in water, that there really might be a real impact because of it, if not just because of it going into mitochondria, but because of it going into the cytoplasm and initiating, you're hitting every single cytoplasm of every single cell of the body all at the same time. And I don't think that's the kind of thing that evolution was preparing for. So I just want to know what your thoughts on that are.
Well, it's a complicated statement. As I said, the repair mechanisms in the mitochondria are quite weak, and it's not an independent living being. So far as and this, you should take this with a grain of salt, where my own research is still kind of ongoing whenever I have time to resume it, which currently I don't. But basically, the way I understand it is the mitochondria are among other things, the communication mechanism between the environment, that is, the food that we take in, the air, water, all that, oxygen, all that, with the nucleus, with the nuclear DNA. And that part of this communication is something called DNA methylation, something, I don't understand a lot about. So you'll have to excuse my biological kind of knowledge limitations here. But these are extremely important communication processes. And when the environment changes, when you have pollutants in the environment, when you have reactive oxygen species and oxidative stress, then your epigenetic signaling and changes can be affected. And so mitochondrial damage actually also affects the nuclear DNA and how it is. And, I think the role of epigenetic changes and the heritability of epigenetic changes is still evolving. 25 years ago, when I first started looking at this, was thought, epigenetic changes, not so heritable, but that has changed in the last 25 years. And the mitochondria play a role in the nuclear DNA as well, though not in the sense of radiative damage of, breaking bonds in the DNA and creating single strand or double strand damage. It's a different kind of signaling, and it's not something that I know very well, so I can't really fully answer your question, but it is a very important, my elementary understanding is if you're hurting the mitochondria, you're also hurting the signaling between the environment and the nuclear DNA and the integrity of the nuclear DNA. All the ways in which you're affecting and how significant it is, I can't tell you because I don't know.
Oh, thank you. And I'm going to call on Taylor Loy. I don't want people whom I don't know to think I'm not welcoming you as well as my old friends. So Taylor, please ask your question.
Hello. First of all, thank you, Dr. Makhijani, for focusing on tritium. I think it's understudied both as a radiological hazard. It's understudied in nonproliferation. It's a significantly neglected topic. So I'm very thankful that you've written your book. And I am 42, so I may be the youngest person in the room. But no one knew that. My question. So I loved your book. I read every word of it. This is a fascinating topic I'm writing my dissertation on. So my question is, with respect to the conclusion, the prescription of lowering tritium in drinking water, anticipated to have some sort of effect, right? That's supposed to improve health, have better outcomes. But the thing is, there are already different tritium drinking water standards all around the world. And there was that peak in 1962 when tritium was highly, a large amount of tritium was in rainwater everywhere, right? Why is there not, we don't have any historical data that can show us some epidemiological effects that can highlight the impact of tritium in the environment, either historically or geographically in areas with higher concentration. You mentioned Braidwood, and there's some issues there. That's great, but that's just one tiny part of our globe, right? This is a global problem.
Yeah. So Taylor, I'll answer your question if you promise to tell me something about you at the end. Do you promise?
I promise.
Okay. I want to make sure. So actually, when I first started researching this question along with my colleagues, and at that time IER had a staff of researchers. Now it's just me with a little bit of help every now and then. And we noticed that in the 1950s, the issue of radiation impacts on children, on malformations, was actually being studied to the point that not in my tritium book, but because it wasn't directly attributed to tritium, but my doctoral alma mater, University of California, at Engineering Alumni magazine wrote an editorial in 1960, basically advocating for more tactical nuclear weapons to fight brush fire wars, sort of in the aftermath. Yeah, I mean, these are sort of actual words from the editorial. It was reprinted in 1990, which is how I read it, how I came across it. And basically saying that atmospheric testing was producing malformations, that there was a small risk, and that every year there would be, not every year, that atmospheric testing was producing 5,000 babies with malformations. And it said that you must weigh this acknowledged risk of malformed babies against the demonstrated need of the United States for a nuclear arsenal. That's pretty close to an exact quote. And actually, it's very crazy because nobody had demonstrated the need of the United States for a nuclear arsenal. On the contrary, the Korean War showed that you couldn't really use nuclear weapons because the Soviets had them. And so it was kind of this very bizarre thing coming out of a scientific institution where the bombs were initially designed, in up the hill in the lab there. And so but I don't think the impacts of tritium were being studied. At that time, the fallout was focused on, you remember the strontium-90 in baby's teeth and Barry Commoner. I knew Barry, he was a friend, a very great man and a great, great biologist, in addition to being an environmentalist and a social justice activist and advocate. Then in the 60s, so at first in the 50s, sorry for the prolonged answer, but this I think will interest everyone. Until the late 50s, there was no separate standard for the protection of the public. Most of the workers, people exposed were in nuclear weapons plants. There were some, naval reactors, and one reactor had been built in the US, and there'd been one or two in Britain and a couple in Russia, in the Soviet Union. And that was it. So it was essentially a military enterprise. But in the late 50s, as civilian nuclear power came to the fore, they created separate standards and tighter standards, 10 times stricter standards of exposure to the public. They tightened the worker standards, 5 rem per year, and the public standards were reduced 10 times less than workers to 500 millirem, later on tightened to 100 in the late 80s. And at that time, it seems to me, with all the strontium-90 in baby's teeth and the concerns of children, in the 60s and 70s, children disappeared from the radiation research literature that I have seen. I haven't seen everything, so if I'm wrong, please let me know. I don't like to be wrong. I like to issue a correction if I'm wrong, and I will. And then came back in the 90s. So if you look at Beer 5, which was published in around the end of the 80s, early 90s, 91, I think, you don't see a separate thing for radiation risk for children. Males and females considered to be almost the same risk. And then at the end of the 90s, the EPA recognized that females were more at risk and children were a lot more at risk. And Beer 7 formalized that. So children kind of came back into the scene, but pregnant women have not yet. So that's the history. I don't know why, but I think the idea that children might need to be more protected or might be harmed, might have, I don't know, it would be an interesting history to research. Was it because they didn't want to alarm the public that, you know, children might be harmed by nuclear power plant emissions? I don't know whether that was the reason or not. But it's a very, very interesting history. And that's why we have this gap in knowledge. It's true that you had all of this huge spike of tritium. A lot of water must have been contaminated. And, you know, we're all different. So all of us have different genetic susceptibilities, not only to radiogenic diseases, but all diseases. I mean, there was a woman in France who smoked cigarettes and she died at 110 or 115 or something. I don't think she died from lung cancer. I don't know. But you know, but smoking carries a probabilistic risk, you know, of lung cancer. So tritium is the same. I advocated to the national academies that they should study these issues like early failed pregnancies. It is possible to study them. It's very difficult, but it's absolutely essential that it be done. We're not protecting. I mean, you know, with the issues of guns in schools and kids having to hide. I mean, we're not protecting our children in more general ways. And this is a kind of a detailed example from something that I've studied. Now tell me about you. I think there are people waiting, so be brief, but tell me about you.
I'm a PhD candidate at Virginia Tech. I'm in science and technology studies field working on nuclear weapons policy. I previously worked in the nuclear power industry, Browns Ferry nuclear plant. And I became very interested in tritium once I learned it was produced at Watts Bar for weapons. And that sort of set me on this track.
So for that, I'm going to give you my personal email. You can write to me. I'm very interested in what you are doing. And as regards Watts Bar, let me tell you a little story. I'll be willing to stay after 9:30 to answer at least these 3 questions, if you let me tell this story. So there was a reporter who called me about 2 years ago from Tennessee, who was writing about Watts Bar, and Watts Bar, as most of you know, and as Taylor has just said, makes tritium for nuclear weapons in that civilian reactor. They have lithium-6 target rods, and the tritium is separated and refined at Savannah Riverside. And as a result of making tritium in the reactor, they also make more tritium in the reactor and discharge tritium upstream from the drinking water of a large city. Is it Nashville? I don't remember which city it is. Watts Bar is upstream from which big city, Taylor?
Chattanooga.
Yeah, Chattanooga. Maybe I don't remember.
It's between Knoxville and Chattanooga. Sequoia is close to Chattanooga. Watts Bar is closer to Knoxville, Tennessee. Yeah.
Okay, so I went over all the stuff that I have just told you today with him. I hadn't quite finished my book, but I'd finished most of the research, so I shared that with him. I wrote many of the things that I've told you regarding pregnancy and mitochondrial risk to the national academies in a letter published in January 2022. So I sent him that. He wrote, according to him, a 5,000-word article in calling attention. So I said, if the military is going to impose risks on pregnant women, at least they should disclose that. that we're imposing, and that this is why making tritium is justified. Everybody has to bear some risk for the national defense, and we think this is a justified risk. Full disclosure. I think we should have full disclosure about what risks are being imposed on us by all militaries, not just U.S. military, but U.S. military owes that obligation. The health part of his article was at first not published at all. Then the health part of his article was excised, and eventually never saw the light of day. Yeah.
That's really something. Gordon.
Yeah.
Gordon says he has quite a bit of info on teratogenic information. So, but anyway, Gordon, go ahead and make your comment and ask your question. It seems like Arjun's in it for the duration. It is.
I don't know about the duration, but I'll answer a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's stop with David Kraft.
Yeah. Okay. So, David, you'll have the last question. And there were a couple in the chat that since they were in the chat, they're going to be short. But go ahead, Gordon.
Okay, I'll just unmute myself. I just wanted to ask Arjun if he was familiar with a lot of people don't know very much about the KIKK study from Germany, which found when the 17 nuclear reactors in Germany were still operating before they started the shutdown, they did a very careful, one of the best epidemiological studies ever conducted. And they found, much to their surprise, that children under 5 had a significantly higher elevated risk of lung cancer if they lived within 5 kilometers of a nuclear power plant. And they subtracted one plant after another to find out which one was causing the problem. And they found out they were all giving the same results. No matter which reactors they withdrew from the study and looked at the other data, they still found the same thing, that there was a significant increase in leukemia among children under 5. They said that there was no way this could be caused by radiation because the radiation levels were too low. However, a little thought, Dr. Ian Fairley in England said that it's probably tritium that's doing this, because in order to get leukemia under the age of 5, they had to be exposed in utero. And exposed in utero, what would be a common factor for all these plants? Well, tritium would be a logical thing because it's released in such large quantities. I just wonder if people are aware of that. And Arjun, whether you yourself have taken a look at that KIKK study.
I have not studied it. Yeah, I've not studied it, but I do know about it. And I agree with the basic thesis that you just put forward. That's why I wrote the book. I've happened to focus on Braidwood because I've been there. I know the people. I think Sarah's dad collected a lot of very good information, and I wanted to put that in and highlight it. That's why we commissioned this basic modeling of tritium emissions from Braidwood with actual data from the NRC. Well, actual, accepting the official. I have reservations of how the monitoring and reporting is done, but accepting the monitoring and reporting. Yeah, I do know about this study, and I think part of the reason I wrote this book is I think that tritium is likely to be, presuming it's radiogenic, which I think it probably is, just at least partly, tritium is likely to be the most important explanation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think it's the closest thing we have to a smoking gun.
Gordon, you started out talking about lung cancer and switched over to leukemia. I think you meant leukemia all along.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant leukemia. Did I say lung cancer?
At first you said lung cancer in kids.
Leukemia.
You meant leukemia.
No,
okay.
No, not
I
lung
wanted
cancer,
to get
leukemia.
that clear because it confused me at first. All right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Don't be sorry. I just want to make it sure.
Thanks very much, Arjun. A great talk.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd say it was. Yeah. Okay, Joseph R. Demare.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Given the history of radiological industries like the radium industry, like radiation being used for diagnostic purposes and so forth, we keep discovering that what's initially described as a harmless dose ends up being not harmless. What do you think the odds are that we're going to eventually discover that the tritium industry, you mentioned it's being used for watch dials and exit signs. Down the line, we may find that the tritium industry is similarly dangerous for the people in it.
Well, as I've said, it's, well, it's radioactivity and it'll harm you but it harms you in a smaller set of circumstances than radium. Radium has a strong gamma emission, so when you have it on a dial in your watch, it's going to irradiate you, penetrate the skin, and so on. Of course, the famous problem with radium was with the radium dial painters. They mix the radium in paint and they lick the brushes to make the brushes pointy so they could paint the dials accurately. And that, of course, gave them horrible bone disease. Radium, of course, goes to the bone. And that's how some of the properties of radium and calcium, being a calcium analog, were discovered. And actually, Manhattan Project plutonium standards were based to some extent on the understanding of what the radium dial painters suffered. But tritium is different in that, as I've explained, it has only beta radiation, no gamma. So it will not penetrate this. If there's a tritium decay outside your body, it will not penetrate the dead layer of the skin, which is 10 to 40 microns. The 18.6 keV would penetrate maybe 10 or 15 microns. I don't remember the number. But that's the most energetic tritium beta radiation. But tritium is I would argue, in some ways, the most important radionuclide in the nuclear age, because it is ubiquitous. It's the largest emission, discharges and emissions that are biologically active of any radionuclide from nuclear power plants. It's in power plants, it's in weapons. As I showed you the numbers, the concentration in the fetus is higher than the concentration in the mother. So it's water, it invades every cell. So it's, from a number of points of view, tritium is just extremely important, and we ought to be paying a lot more attention to it. I'm not saying it's the most dangerous thing gram for gram, because it's not. But when you put all the things together, it's ubiquity, its quantity, the very large number of sources of tritium, the water into which it discharged, the fact that we drink it. When you put all those things together, this radionuclide should be much more in the center of our attention. And, as I said, that was the reason I wrote the book, not to provide you with all the answers, but to say, okay, we need to go in that direction. Not to say plutonium is less dangerous, or, we ought not to be making any more plutonium, that's for sure.
Thank you. Okay, now, Mary and John and Alfred, we were going to stop with Dave, and I think Arjun's actually pretty tired. So
I'm fine. It's all right. Go ahead.
Well, because
Yeah.
even James Heddle now, he was one of the people who produced SOS, the San
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So let's stop with Dave, and yeah.
Okay. So we're going to stop with Dave. All right, Dave, go ahead and ask your question. I keep saying answer.
I'm actually going to complicate the situation for you, Arjun, because there were a couple of questions in the chat that didn't get addressed. So I'm going to go back to those. They're they could require short answers, though.
Okay.
Sandra Kurtz asks, I live downstream from Watts Bar in Chattanooga, as does my pregnant granddaughter. Should she be drinking the local water? And if not, what water should she be drinking?
Well, I can't tell her what water she should be drinking. She should look at the water. I don't know what her water supply is. There may be different water utilities. Water utilities are required to measure the radioactivity among other pollutants, and they should report it. You can get a report from your water authority. You can probably download it from their website. I've never looked. I don't know of data in bottled water bottled water for tritium. It might depend on where the bottled water is from. So it's not a simple question to answer, but I think if you're living downstream of Watts Bar, there's, I mean, I'd be happy if Dave, you send me the name of the water authority. I'd be happy to look at I can't give medical advice in this kind of context, and individual advice. It would be wrong. But I've given you what cautions I'm going to give you. I mean, because I've never looked at whether bottled water is tritium in it or not. So.
Okay, thanks. There's a second question before I get to it.
And I'm really sorry that I can't give you a good answer to your question. I truly am.
Okay. Before I do the second question, those of you who had other questions, since we're doing a cutoff, I recommend you put your question in the chat. And just so everybody knows, we will be sending out the chat as a text file a little bit later this evening. So get your question in there. Arjun may be able to respond to you by email at a later date.
Maybe.
Maybe. And then also in the chat, you'll see that there are lots of links to where you can get the book and download the book. So people have been asking about that. And at a later date, this event is being recorded and will be put up on YouTube. So I just wanted you all to know that as well.
Yeah, I can quickly say that if there's contamination upstream, it would be from the rain.
Okay. Here's a question from Carrie Shug. So the claim was that the radioactive release from Fukushima was less than other radiation. Does this group say that it was worse because that was tritium, or other releases were things not as bad?
I don't understand the question. There were a lot of different releases from Fukushima. There were huge releases during the accident. There were all kinds of radionuclides, releases after the accident. I was talking about the specific dumping of tritium from the cooling water that's collected in the 1,000+ tanks that are on the site. And there's more than 1 million tons of water in those tanks. And they're filtering that water and dumping, and then dumping the filtered water, which contains a fair amount of tritium, into the Pacific Ocean. So I was just talking about that.
Okay. Thanks, Arjun. Jan, are we
and the Fukushima, so I'm part of the expert panel for the Pacific Islands Forum, which is the kind of the European Union of the island governments in the Pacific region. And there were five of us who advised the Pacific Islands Forum, and the papers that we prepared, and I did one on my own criticizing the IAEA. They are on our website. I published them so the public could have access to them. You can find out about why we thought what TEPCO and the Japanese government are doing wrong in multiple dimensions, and the IAEA participated in that.
Well, there were other questions. Ace asked a question, and I think he was asking sort of as a joke, how many SMNRs could we create and still stay below your standard? And then another thing was more like a comment. If there are no vital uses for tritium, wouldn't it be best to have the natural level of tritium back in the 40s and 50s be what we're aiming for? So those were more like comments from Ace, although he did ask the question about SMNRs. And then
I can't answer that. I don't know.
Oh, of course, yeah. And then Catherine Barnes wants to talk about, or she brought up the subject of Palisades, which she lives near, and she was wondering if it's known that Palisades releases more tritium than other power plants. I'm probably
you can get environmental reports from the NRC for any reactor for any year. The measurements have some deficiencies, but they're not totally made up numbers. So to some extent, they're an indication of what happens. And tritium measurements, both releases to the air and discharges to the water, and other radionuclides. They're all in these environmental reports. We actually gathered the data from every single reactor for 1 year, and and put it on our website, air releases, water discharges, to give you an example of how they differ. That's not in the book, but that is on IER's website. So for Palisades, you could download the environmental reports that the company files with the NRC and compare for yourself. And you have some general data in the book, so you can compare it to what other plants look like.
Okay, and I'm sorry to cut off the person with the 847 prefix, but we need to bring this to a close now. So I'm going to ask Dave to make a couple of closing remarks, and I'm bowing out now because I'm the Q&A person. So
847, do you have a very quick question? No more hands, please, if I answer this one. 847, be quick, or
unmute
hold your
yourself.
peace.
It could be Jake. Unmute yourself, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, be quick.
Hello? Okay. My question is, thank you for your talk. A couple weeks ago, Putin, there's a news item that came up very briefly. Vladimir Putin announced that he's pulling out of the nuclear weapons.
This is out of bounds for this talk, so I'm not going to entertain that question. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right.
Thanks very much, everybody. And I'm turning it back to David for the last, for the closing remarks.
And I will try and keep it brief as well. Arjun, it's so good to see you again. I miss you. It's been a long time since we've been together, but
yeah,
know that we're behind you, next to you, in front of you.
Okay. Next time you come to Washington, give me a call. I don't move much out of my kitchen except to see my family.
Going to, I don't know if I'll be praise or embarrass you a little bit here. You've already advertised this book, the Tritium book, but 16 years ago, this book also came out. And I raise it for people to see now, carbon-free, nuclear-free, a roadmap for U.S. energy policy, because as you all know, the COP conference has begun. And as many of you already know, the nuclear industry is there in force, and they're there to sell small modular nuclear reactors and other advanced reactors. Another program that we operate here at NEIS is on the first Monday of each month, and we call it Meme the Media. And it's an opportunity to track all of the public relations BS that the nuclear industry puts in letters to the editors and op-eds. So I raise this now because of Arjun's expertise in renewables and the fact that COP is here. Over the next 2 weeks, I invite you all to make a pledge to respond to every comment, every article you see that is promoting small modular nuclear reactors, both in print media. If you're on YouTube and you see something where they're talking it up, put it in the comments section. We are being shouted down and beaten over the head by the millions of dollars that the Biden administration has put into small modulars, and the corporate media is doing that as well. If we don't push back and use the next 2 weeks and the visibility that COP provides us, it's game over in terms of messaging. So we encourage you to develop your own memes. If for some reason you have a shortage of those, please send us an email and we will send you a nice long list of the ones that we developed on Monday, some of which have already been sent to newspapers in the Chicago area. So Meme the Media. And Arjun, thank you for carbon free.
Yeah, could I say one thing about carbon free, or two things about carbon free, nuclear free? Do read it. It's available for free download, but it's completely obsolete technically. It was written in 2007 when solar was $10 a watt. Batteries were more than $1,000 a kilowatt hour. It painted a roadmap that was exceedingly difficult. It showed it was possible. I did a research report modeling, doing hour by hour modeling of the Maryland electricity sector. I put the link in the chat. I'll put it in again. It's called Prosperous Renewable Maryland. This is a very reliable. It could always be updated. Things are actually better technologically today than 7 years ago when this was published. But this is a sort of a pretty much up to date of what you can do with demand response and electric vehicles and heating and solar at $1 a watt and so on and so on. So if you're going to use something in your advocacy, do not use carbon-free, nuclear-free. You can read it for historical interest. It was a very interesting exercise, but you can use that one.
And I merely raised it because 16 years ago, you knew and we knew that we didn't need nuclear power, and we could
That's right. That was the idea of writing that book.
Exactly.
But it was a hard road. Now it's not even a hard road technically.
All right.
Okay.
I thank you, Arjun, once again. Wish you happy holidays, you and your family. Say hi to Ani
You
and
too.
the kids.
And I'm a Hindu, so I can say Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, all that, do it.
Festival of Lights.
Enjoy, people.
Indeed. And for the rest of you, happy holidays. We will not see you in December, but we welcome you back in January for Night with the Experts, talking about the role of arts in activism. So thank you, Jan, for emceeing tonight, and thank you all for joining us.
And thank you, Jan, for staying on my case so I did this.
Also, I put the memes, somebody asked for the memes, and we have 3 major memes that we've been using in Meme the Media, and I stuck them in the chat at the last minute. So.
And I put our email address if you want a copy of those. It's a much longer list. We'll be happy to send it to you. We will send out the chat tonight. The YouTube recording of this will be put up very soon, I hope. And in the meantime, thank you all and stay well.